Airing first on Asheville FM, WSFM LP 103.3 in Asheville, this is The Final Straw Radio, a weekly anarchist and anti-authoritarian radio show broadcasting out of occupied Salagi land in southern Appalachia. We bring you voices and perspectives from projects and struggles all around the world. This week on The Final Straw, you'll hear me speaking with Cora Borradaile, who sits on the advisory board of the Civil Liberties Defense Center and works around issues of tech security and movement. The Final Straw is a proud member of the Channel Zero network of anarchist podcasts, and here's a jingle from another member of CZN.
The home of theory and real talk, that radical hip-hop. The beat don't stop till every last cop drop the badger off a cliff, like I give a fuck.
Wait, hold up. That was 2012 style. It's still fuck the police, but where are we going?
This ain't the motherfucking Chapo frat house. They call me a woke Joe Rogan, the way I bring them facts out. But I don't sit down and break bread with Nazis. I break beats to break borders and destitute economies. Out here on a hauling commune where the cops can't find you and them pine trees calm you. Collective liberation, food autonomy and anarchy. Not an identity, some practices to get free. I do this shit cause I like to read and explore what it means to be a real human being. In the Anthropocene, we stay pushing, expanding imagination, think beyond the quote-unquote revolution. Let's get free in the here and now and recognize the little's work from Napoleon to Mao. Shout out the Zapatistas, Rojava, and those who get it. We can live without the state, even if we don't get it. The old world's dying, build a new one instead. While I'm trying to kill that colonized white man living in my head, moving beyond ideological disputes. Don't tell me what you hate, tell me what you're gonna do. No politician's gonna save you. Bully that, talk to me about build the party, let's just show me what the weeds at. Think outside the box, there's a million ways to fight back. Learn about a few on the motherfucking Soulcast. The Soulcast, a bi-weekly podcast at the end of every other week. Available on the Channel Zero Podcast Network or wherever podcasts are found.
And now an update about the condition of anarchist prisoner Sean Swain.
Hello, my name is Lauren LaRock, soon to be Lauren Swain. My partner Sean Swain has been confined by the state of Ohio for non-crime for almost 3 decades. And Ohio Governor Mike DeWine won't set him free. Sean acted in self-defense in 1991, killing a man who kicked in his door and threatened his life. But Ohio had no self-defense law. The Castle Doctrine wasn't introduced until after Sean went to prison. And because the man he killed was related to a court official, and because that court official was the chair of the Democratic Party, the prosecutor, also a Democrat, fabricated and concealed evidence of Sean's innocence. When Sean was wrongly convicted of crimes he didn't commit, he won his appeal. But the trial court judge, also a Democrat, refused to give him a fair trial. They went as far as to block him from filing anything in court, making it impossible for him to get out. This is how Ohio courts operate. Ohio courts broke the law to imprison a man who hasn't broken the law. It's mind over matter. They don't mind, and he doesn't matter. And what they did to him, they can now do to you. Because he maintains his innocence, and because he's spoken out against corruption and injustice, the parole board has made Sean serve an additional 15 years and counting. Parole board members have specifically interrogated his criticisms about the parole system and his political activity, and they gave him more time. He's been punished for nothing more than telling the truth. Sean is a published writer of several books. He has a college degree and is a certified paralegal. He's never been accused of any violence in the 29 years of imprisonment. He contributes weekly segments to a global syndicated radio show. His personal papers are archived at the University of Michigan to celebrate his impact on American political culture. However, the parole board treats Sean like a terrorist. They do this because they have no standards, no regulation, no statutes they have to follow, and they can do whatever they want. Sean is a good man, and I love him very much, but the powerful career bureaucrats run Ohio, and they don't care about the people like us. Governor Mike DeWine enables them. Sean filed for clemency with the governor, and we told the governor this whole terrible story, and we rallied public support. Sometimes more than 100 emails a day went to the governor. We held our breath, hoping Governor DeWine would see what happened and would be moved to give Sean his freedom. It turns out Mike DeWine denied Sean's request back in April and didn't even tell us until October 21st. Not only did Mike DeWine say the man I'm about to marry cannot come home, but he didn't have the decency to let us know. That's wrong. This is how Mike DeWine treats non-criminals who didn't even have the benefit of Ohio's current self-defense law, and this is how he treats their loved ones. Mike DeWine is not a friend to the Second Amendment. Ohio justice is broken. There's no accountability. Judges break the law, the parole board has no accountability, and the governor allows him to continue business as usual. I need Sean home, and so does his mom, Nancy, who is elderly. Sean is an only child, and his dad died back in March. Sean's mom needs him home. Mike DeWine and his officials neglect apathy. Their loyalty to failed approaches that don't keep us safe are ruining the lives of people. People like me. The Ohio General Assembly needs to pass serious amendments to the courts and to abolish the parole board entirely. And Mike DeWine needs to set up a commission to release prisoners who are suitable for release, so Ohio families don't pay millions for prisons, more than they do for schools and road repairs, like they do now. I am waiting for my husband to come home. Any help in spreading this message would be much appreciated. Thank you.
You can write to Sean Swain at his latest address at Sean Swain, number 2015638, Buckingham Correctional, P.O. Box 430, Dillwyn, Virginia, 23936. You can find his past writings, recordings of his audio segments, and updates on his case at seanswain.org, or now follow him on Twitter at @SwainRocks. So I'm speaking with Cora Borradaile, who's on the advisory board of the Civil Liberties Defense Center, or CLDC, and we spoke before about a range of issues in May of this year, before the George Floyd uprising and the resulting ACAB spring. During the uprising, researchers, journalists, and activists saw that applications of new, or new to us, surveillance methods were being used by security forces against the populace in the so-called U.S. So I was hoping to pick Cora's brain a bit about this and see, especially since upcoming months in the U.S. also might get a little spicy with the election and all. Thank you, Cora, very much for taking the time to have this conversation.
Yeah, it's great to talk with you.
So just to list off a few things, like this summer at least saw the use of military drones surveilling and sharing data with law enforcement in Minneapolis, and lots of militarized gear being brought out in streets across the U.S. From late May at least, protests against police violence and collusion with parastate white supremacists have been ongoing in Portland, Oregon. In July, we saw the deployment of federal officers from the Department of Homeland Security, including Customs and Border Patrol, and the Department of Justice, sent out to fight against protesters in the streets of Portland and attack and kidnap people, including journalists from that and other cities. The U.S. Marshals also had their own aerial surveillance to track crowds in Portland. It came out this summer. On the tech side of things, the public got wind, apparently from some leaks within the Department of Homeland Security, that DHS had been cloning activist cell phones. Can you talk a little bit about this and what cell phone cloning is?
Yeah, from that report, there were very few details. So a lot of it is guesswork as to what could possibly be going on. I could imagine two different ways in which they're cloning cell phones, one which is scarier than the other. The more likely, I think, is the less scary version, which is if they manage to physically get your cell phone, like you're arrested and your cell phone is confiscated from you, even if it's confiscated temporarily, then they're, copying everything from your cell phone and possibly making a new cell phone that behaves just like your cell phone. So it would allow them to intercept calls, possibly receive messages that you were intended to receive. The scarier version, but probably less likely, is the ability for them to be able to do the same thing without having the need to confiscate your phone to do so. That feels unlikely to me that they were doing that. If it was some sort of remote cloning, I would guess that they were just cloning sort of the network ID of your phone and not the contents of your phone. This would still allow them to do things like intercept calls and intercept data, But in both scenarios, I think end-to-end encryption, apps that you use like Signal or Keybase or Wire that enable end-to-end encryption, I think the messages that you're receiving there would still be safe, and that the cloned device shouldn't be able to have the keys enabled to decrypt those messages that were intended for you. And even traffic that is, if you're visiting a website on your phone that you're accessing via HTTPS, where the S stands for secure, I think that even they wouldn't be able to see the contents of that web page either, because there's a key exchange that happens between you and the web server that they would have to play man in the middle on, which is more complicated to do in a way that you wouldn't be able to tell that something was going wrong. All that's to say, it's still scary, and I think that if you have poor encryption practices, like your phone is confiscated in an unlocked form, so they have access to all of your encryption keys for things like Signal and Keybase and whatever other secure messaging apps you might be using, then you should do whatever you need to do to alert everyone you contact with to delete your contact from their groups and so on. And if a phone is, if you have a phone that's confiscated, and certainly in an unlocked form, right, I would not trust that phone again. If your phone is confiscated, but it was locked at the time, and presumably you have a good password so that they can't easily unlock your phone, I would still maybe, do a factory reset of your phone and start fresh by installing everything over again.
I'm not sure what the basis of this is, but conversations that I was having with friends when we were talking about the latter of the two instances that you were talking about, where the hypothetical that remotely the cloning of a network ID or like a SIM connection could be done, that it would be similar to your phone, like you getting a new phone but having the same number, that if Signal was installed in that device and it was connecting to the same phone number, by a man-in-the-middle attack via a cloned SIM, that it would appear that the interception could still be happening, but that everyone would see a notation that there had been a change in safety number. Is that maybe what would happen, or?
Yes, that is perfectly said, right? So that's for them to be able to both clone your phone and intercept messages without those, safety number has changed messages happening would be very, very difficult. So certainly if there are reports of anybody who's had a confiscated phone and then all of a sudden they're getting, all of their contacts are noticing that their safety number has changed with them, that would be super interesting to find out.
Or they stop getting messages.
Also horrifying.
Yeah. They notice that they stopped getting messages. Everyone notices that the safety number changed. Then that means that hypothetically the cloned phone or whatever would now be in those chats.
So, I don't know if it's as simple as that, because when you add a new device on Signal, all the other devices get a notification of that.
Oh, I see. So if I had like a desktop and at least one cell phone that was getting messages. Yeah, so if that device was no longer getting new messages because the traffic was being routed to a different device, you wouldn't get it.
It still shouldn't have, right, so your contacts should at the very least receive the messages saying, the notification saying that your safety number has changed. If it's a remote clone, I think the only way in which the cloned phone would be able to read the messages in pre-existing groups, for example, would be if the device was physically confiscated and copied, because there are encryption keys that are used to start those conversations, which are needed.
Well, yeah, but do you mean the messages that were in loops before?
No, to continue to receive messages from conversations that had already been going on. If someone started a new conversation after the cloning, then you might not, the other people in the conversation might not be able to notice. But if you were continuing a conversation that had started before the cloning, I don't think you would be able to get that information without having physical access to the device and being able to copy over the encryption keys that were used to start those conversations.
Because they're being stored on the phone and not on the server.
That's right. Yeah. So, for example, when you add a new Signal device, part of what happens is copying over the encryption keys needed to continue conversations. And so there's, a QR code that, if you say you have Signal on your phone and you start using Signal on your desktop, there's a QR code that is used to link those two devices so that both devices receive and are able to decrypt messages that go to you as an identifier.
If you notice somebody in your group or one of your friends has changed their number, what's a good verification?
Yeah, don't message them on Signal and ask them, right? Because who knows who's answering, right? So try to find a different form of communication, even if it's via a friend or, via a regular phone call, like, just a normal phone call. But ideally, via email or some other band that's unrelated to your phone would be perfect. To ask them, hey, I noticed your Signal, your safety numbers changed. What went on? And it might just be a simple, most of the time, or like every time this has happened to me, the answer has been, I had to reinstall my operating system on my phone, or I, dropped my phone in a pool and I had to get a new phone, right? That's usually the reason for safety numbers changing. But definitely what you want to do is find a different way to ask that other than using Signal, and ideally other than using the phone, especially if we are worried about cloned phones. Because if you just use a normal text message, say like an SMS text message to your friend, and your friend's phone has been cloned, then it could be the cops responding saying, oh yeah, I had to get a new phone.
I've seen some people do a thing where they ask someone in a group, like when their safety number changed, like, hey, can you leave a voice memo with your name and the current time that you're recording the memo, and send it into the loop, and that way everyone hears the person's voice and it's the time when they specifically get asked to record the memo. So it's, outside of enemy of the state level NSA operation. It's probably not somebody compiling an automated voice message in that person's voice.
Yeah, that's a pretty good method for doing that. As you point out, synthesizing people's voices can be done, but taking into account what your threat level is, right? Are you someone who they're going to be throwing everything at and be able to do in a very short period of time to synthesize your voice? For the protest movements we've seen, probably not. However, if you're like a leader of a protest group, if you're someone that they're really going to be going after because they think that taking out this one person or going out after this one person will completely destroy the movement, which I don't think is the kind of movement time we're in right now, which is good, to avoid those specific people who could really destroy a movement. That's a pretty good method.
If you can speak to that prior scenario, is that basically the actually copying the contents of a phone? I think that was the subject of the recent article by UpTurn called Mass Extraction. That's right. If you could talk a little bit about, I guess, what the findings were there. Like, I was kind of surprised to see, I guess kind of surprised, kind of not surprised, but that like the local law enforcement here in Asheville had spent at least $49,000 according to their studies on cell phone extraction tools. But what are mobile device forensic tools, and what do you know about them? How widespread, and what kind of stuff do they do?
Yeah, so these things have existed for a long time. We've been talking about them at CLDC for a long time, but this UpTurn report is really wonderful for, just as you say, describing how widespread they are, right? Small police departments have them. Medium-sized police departments spend hundreds of thousands of dollars on access to this over the course of 5 years. And, some of the capabilities were actually, I suppose not really surprising, but reading them all in one place and knowing how low cost access to technology was sobering, I suppose. So these cell phone extraction devices, they come in different forms, but the kind that is most popularly seen is like a small standalone device that you plug a cell phone into, and that standalone device either tries to break into that phone if it's locked, or otherwise just copies all of the content of that phone for later analysis. And some of the things that were surprising to me was how much was available even when the phone was locked. So, locked and encrypted. There's a lot of data that is still existing in an unencrypted form on your phone. So, for example, when you receive a phone call, say your phone is locked, you receive a phone call, the name of your contact still shows up, right? And it's not the name that your contact is sending you, that's not metadata associated with that contact, right? Like if your mother is calling you, it probably shows up mom on your phone. And the reason it says that is because your address book has an entry with that phone number and the name mom attached to it. And so your address book entries are existing in an unencrypted state, for example. And some of the other things that were sort of surprising that were pointed out that existed in this unencrypted state, even though your phone was in a locked condition, or, Telegram files and Discord files and files associated with Google Mail. And, I think a lot of this stuff could just be from bad decisions that the app developer made, right? Like Telegram is not necessarily focused on security. And so for convenience or speed, they may just not be hiding that information behind the device encryption. So, there was definitely some reporting in that UpTurn report about being able to brute force guess passwords. And so there are some things that you can do to protect yourself from that, which is to, have a long enough password, for example, or, if you have an Apple device, you can enable your phone to sort of self-wipe if you have 10 incorrect guesses, for example, which if you have a small child at home, maybe you don't want to do because I almost guarantee you'll end up with a wiped phone by the end of the week.
With encrypted files, if like there are messages or what have you that are saved in an encrypted section on the phone, would that get just copied and saved and tested against like decryption later? Is that the idea?
I think what's happening in most cases is they're taking a copy of the encrypted information, possibly in the hopes that they could decrypt it later, or in the hopes that they would be able to get the unlock password from you by other means, right? Like from a court order, for example. They did point to instances where they were still able to bypass security features like encryption because of security flaws, which is very common, right? If your phone is badly out of date and you haven't been keeping up with installing security updates, always install your security updates. That's a common thing in computer security, that there are flaws that can be taken advantage of that can allow bad actors to break through otherwise strong encryption. But I think that if you're keeping an up-to-date phone, I think that's the best that any of us can do, right?
Another point that was interesting in the article, and I'm glad that they pointed it out, was the sorts of instances when this was being applied to people. Like, you would imagine that you hear about like Apple being pressed to give up encrypted information or give a backdoor when there's a mass shooting, or some sort of incident that may involve multiple conspirators and the loss of life, something very serious. But in the UpTurn article, they talk about how through their research and requesting of records, it showed that a lot of law enforcement agencies and even local law enforcement agencies are attempting to like either pressure people whose devices they get a hold of or apply for warrants to get this, to copy people's contents of their phones for minor things that may not have anything to do with that they're being accused of. Like if it's something like shoplifting or graffiti or public intoxication, petty drug charges, sex work. These are a few of the examples that they give. And considering the way that policing works in the United States, and this shouldn't surprise anyone in the listening audience, that police tend to focus their attention on poor and racialized parts of the population. So if law enforcement gets people's data, whether by asking for it and pressuring people into it or by using devices, and then saves it for a later investigation, and there's no sort of oversight in this, it seems very likely that the sorts of data that they're collecting could be used to build future cases or to build profiles on people for things they haven't actually been accused of so far.
Yep. Fishing for data. Yeah, I mean, maybe they're just trying to justify the purchase of this stuff, right? In Oregon, they spend $500,000 on cell phone extraction technologies. Portland alone spent $250,000 in a period of 4 or 5 years. Like, that's a lot of money to justify, right? And if you're only using it, 3 times a year for homicide cases, then maybe you can't justify actually spending that much money, and you would just farm out whenever you do need it for something like that, like either to a fusion center or pay per service from one of these companies. So it might just partially be them covering their asses and saying, oh yeah, we use it 10 times a week. But, we've also seen examples of law enforcement agencies that just collect so much data almost for the purpose of just having data, right? The LAPD, famously uses Palantir, which is a horrible company, to do all sorts of data analytics for their region, collecting data on pizza purchases and parking passes and, all sorts of things that don't seem at all relevant to law enforcement, but it's almost a compulsion to just collect the data and see what you can do with it.
Another thing that I had seen recently was Google was recently in the news when court documents were unsealed in Detroit relating to witness intimidation and arson by an associate of R. Kelly. And this is in regards to keyword warrants. Could you talk about, are you familiar with this case, and could you talk a little bit about keyword warrants and what they are?
Yeah, so, keyword warrants, I hadn't heard about them before this news story came out earlier this month, but it's not surprising, right? I certainly was familiar with just how many requests for data Google gets and responds to, right, affecting hundreds of thousands of user accounts every year in the US. So it wouldn't surprise me if, Google, instead of just getting requests saying, hey, I'd like to have all of the emails associated with the email address, thefinalstraw@gmail.com, instead of getting that kind of request, which seems to be the more straightforward type of request related to a specific account that might be involved in, a law enforcement issue, probably not though, to expand that to, hey, I want to know all the information you have about people who've searched for the final straw. So that's the keyword warrant or the keyword search request that happened in this case. We've seen examples of geofence warrants happening for Google Maps, right? Asking for anybody whose phone or who has searched for an address within a given region. That there were a few stories about over the last year. So yeah, of course, the data is there. Why not ask for it? And, Google is not going to say no, because why would they?
Yeah, so basically, again, by collecting information based on its availability and then attempting to apply it to, so in this case with the arson, where they asked for people that had searched for the address of a house where a car got set on fire within a certain period of time, and then cross-reference that to a geofence, basically, of what phones were in the area within that period of time, and were able to pinpoint and place charges. And that's not all the information came out from that. Some of the court records are still sealed, but it's kind of a frightening application of technology and a very, like, as you say, like happy to oblige industry.
Yeah. I think the potential for false arrests and harassment of people, right? Like, you happen to find someone in that area who you don't like for one reason or another, You can arrest them, right, and hold them for a while, even if you have no other evidence. Harassment arrests are used all the time by law enforcement and have been for decades, centuries probably.
So I guess use DuckDuckGo if you're going to be committing an arson.
Yeah, I would avoid Google. I definitely use DuckDuckGo. I prefer DuckDuckGo for kind of selfish reasons, because I find the personalized search aspect of Google to just be somewhat infuriating. When I search for something, I don't want to find what Google thinks I want to find. I want to find the documents related to my search.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think, DuckDuckGo, it's hard to avoid these tools, but, DuckDuckGo, anything but Gmail for email, please, right? And, there's alternatives to Google Docs as well. CryptPad seems to be getting better every month. There's improvements to CryptPad, which it offers collaborative online editing of documents, all end-to-end encrypted.
I'm going to presume with this question that you're not a lawyer. Am I correct in that?
I'm not a lawyer, no.
But it seems like things like intercepting phone calls, people's text messages, or getting deep into their cell phones and all the information that's collected in them for possibly like arguably unrelated topics might overstep into the realm of FISA, or might overstep into one of those amendments, that protects our rights to rights against unfair search and seizure. That just doesn't seem to be the case. Or in these instances, is it that these methods haven't been brought before courts to be challenged?
Yeah, so everything I know about the law, I learned from CLDC and Law and Order in a previous lifetime. So what I do know about these from reading various news articles and conversations with CLDC is, as pointed out by UpTurn, a lot of the extraction of data from cell phones was based on consent, not a warrant, right? It was about a 50-50 split, depending on the jurisdiction. So this was the case of sort of probably intimidation by a cop to a person with a cell phone to say, oh, well, let us check your cell phone. And I'm not sure if they give full disclosure of what they mean by let me check your cell phone, right? Let me copy everything there is on your cell phone off your cell phone, if you're not guilty of this minor misdemeanor. So they're just asking permission, right? And, that's one of the things that CLDC shoves down the throats of, is that the right phrase? Shoves down the throats of everyone at their trainings, which is don't consent to searches. Just don't do it. Even if they're going to go ahead and do the search, even if you're not consenting to it, say over and over again, I do not consent to the search. Have a sticker on your phone that says, I do not consent to the search. Because then it can't be used in a court of law, at least, right? The other thing that we've seen over the years is parallel reconstruction. I don't know if I've seen like a well-researched example of this, but certainly people have hinted that this is a common practice where they'll find out something via methods that wouldn't be admissible in a court of law, and then they figure out a way to reconstruct what they know using admissible methods.
Yeah, like in The Wire.
Yeah, exactly. So, that's, something that might be why they're getting information that they can't necessarily use. The other part is just general intelligence work, right? It's not necessarily going to be used to arrest anyone. It's not necessarily going to be used in a court of law, but they just want to know what's going on. And so we're just going to collect as much data as we can. And unless you find out about it, and unless you prove harm in a court of law, then how are you going to stop it from happening? Which is why, this report about the Google keyword searches and Google geofencing searches is so important, right? Because if we can find out about that and we can get a case brought forth and, have it deemed unconstitutional to do this kind of search, then that would stop those kinds of requests from happening. And then you could put pressure on a company like Google. You could put public pressure on a company like Google to say, like, don't respond to these requests. They've been deemed illegal.
And I guess like there's a couple, I guess they're not insights, but there were points in that UpTurn article that I thought were like useful. If someone deletes information on their phone, are they actually deleting information off their phone? And is there an appropriate or like useful, are there good tools for actually wiping data off of phones, or does it just kind of sit there? Magnets.
I don't know of a good tool. I mean, I think that if you do a factory reset of your phone, that's most likely to help make that data inaccessible. Even then, is it actually getting completely deleted? It might not be, right? So there's like, you have memory on your computer or on your cell phone, and when you delete something, it just forgets where it just kind of takes the index away. So imagine this. It's like, I'm trying to use an analogy that people would remember. Do people remember libraries and card catalogs? Like, all my analogies are too old.
I think it's fair. So go ahead.
You think people will remember that?
I think so. Or they've heard the analogy enough that they'll recognize what a card catalog is.
Okay. They've seen a movie with an old-timey library and an old-timey card catalog. Yeah. So you have a big library with books on all the shelves, and the way you know where to find a book is you go to the card catalog and you look up the book that you want and you find its location on the shelf, and then you go to the shelf and you find the book. Well, now, when you delete a file from a computer, really all you're deleting is the card from the card catalog, right? And so when it comes time to put, a new photo, say on, in the memory of your computer or cell phone, you want to store a new photo, you put it on the shelf. Oh, you go to the shelf and you find out, there's supposed to be space here because according to the card catalog, there's nothing stored here. So this must be something that I don't need anymore. Now I'm going to delete that old stuff. I'm going to remove that book from the shelf whose existence was deemed not there anymore by the card catalog. I'll throw it away now and put my new book up, or I'll put my new photo in. So it's not until you use the memory again that the old information actually gets deleted.
So at least on computers, there's like, for instance, I had to reinstall my operating system recently. And when I installed it, I went to like encrypt the home folder and the file system. And also it asked, do you want to overwrite everything else on the hard drive? Is that kind of what you're talking about?
Yeah, so that would be the equivalent of actually going onto all the shelves of the library and removing all of the old books. So that's pretty common when you're setting up on a computer, but I've never seen that option on a phone. And that's what I'm wondering, does a factory reset actually delete all that information? I haven't noticed that myself.
Microwaves. I mean, I saw... Yeah, I got nothing. But like...
Yeah, drop your phone in the pool. Start over.
Start. They invented this thing called rice, though, and then if you put the phone into a bunch of rice, it extracts the water and the data. Well, are there any other things that you'd like to share with the audience concerning digital tech or any insights?
Oh, I did want to share one thing about you asked about them getting this data and is this a legal search and seizure? There are still strange laws that date back to the 80s. So, for example, email, it can be accessed by law enforcement from somewhere like Google with just a subpoena and not a warrant necessarily. Okay, so a warrant for a law enforcement agency to get information that would otherwise be deemed a legal search and seizure, they need to get a warrant from a judge that has probable cause, that proves probable cause for them to get that data or physical item. But if it's email on a server, held at Google, then they don't need to prove probable cause, and they just need a subpoena, which is essentially just a, please, can I have this information? And I think that's where these keyword searches are coming in. I'm not sure that they need to actually have a warrant for those. So that's maybe just one extra detail on that front.
In those instances, it's in one centralized place, although, like, if you're doing a keyword search, yeah, I don't know. I guess I don't know how Google works on the inside, and if it's just constantly categorizing what people type into its different services so that for later use, and then providing that to in easily digestible pills to law enforcement. But if you're sending email and it's unencrypted anyways, and probably getting hoovered up somewhere and fully readable anyway.
Yeah, it depends on who your adversary is, right? I don't think the Portland Police Department has access to, a big hoover of data on a global scale. But they certainly can ask Google for all of the emails of, the activists whose emails addresses they extracted from the phones of when they confiscated them during protests.
Cora, thank you so much. Cora is an associate professor of computer science at Oregon State University with a focus on security state and the adoption of more secure apps, and also is on the board of the CLDC. Thanks again for having this chat.
It was wonderful talking to you, as always.
This is The Final Straw, and I'm Bursa Goodness. This show will later be archived at thefinalstrawradio.noblogs.org, and you can email us with questions and suggestions at thefinalstrawradio@riseup.net or thefinalstrawradio@protonmail.com. If you'd like to use any episode for your project or radio show, feel free to do so. Just send us an email to let us know. If you care to, you can send us letters at The Final Straw Radio, P.O. Box 6004, Asheville, North Carolina, 28816. This show is brought to you by Firestorm Books and Coffee. Located at 610 Haywood Road, Firestorm Books and Coffee is a worker-owned co-op in Asheville specializing in offbeat, underground, and independent literature. You can find a catalog of Firestorm's books and zines, plus a full calendar of events up at their website, firestorm.coop.